Jeremy's naked. Therefore, Dragon is also naked.
Rabbits, who are also stark-ass naked.
It's considered bestiality.
Kind of, yeah.
Welcome to the Yestalgia podcast.
I'm Basil.
I'm Drew.
I'm Amanda.
And today we're going to be talking about The Secret of NIMH. Real quick before we get into chatting about it, I'll give you a quick summary of The Secret of NIMH. A widowed mouse, Mrs. Brisby, must move herself and her 4 children from their home, located in Farmer Fitzgibbon's field, before he starts plowing for the season. However, her son Timmy is gravely ill, and so she must seek help from the rats of NIMH, led by Nicodemus. About all I'll say. We'll talk more about what happens afterwards, and throughout there's a little bit of stuff that happens in between as well. But first thing, would we like to talk about what experience we have with this movie?
Sure, I will. I've read the book. I've seen the movie, God, probably a dozen times, but it's been a really, really long time. I've seen it plenty of times as a kid. I actually rewatched it, I think, for the first time as an adult for the purposes of this podcast. And I actually thought it was better. It was way better than I remembered it being. I remembered it being quite good. But yeah, I was actually surprised how much I enjoyed it as an adult.
Drew, you have no experience, right?
Correct. No experience. I had heard the name several times, never watched it myself, never read the book.
Yeah.
And this past month was my first time watching it for the purpose of this podcast. That was pretty good.
You have some things to say, though, it sounds like.
I wouldn't say it's like super spectacular like Amanda would. It's okay. Maybe I'm a bit of a cynic, but...
Yeah. Well, we'll get into that. As for myself, I had seen it as a child. Particularly, I used to go to daycare, and then later it was like after-school program, so I didn't have to feel like a child. But... yeah, they had played Secret of NIMH multiple times throughout my time, at daycare, basically. However, I remembered zero about it. So, yeah, it was fun to rewatch. I think it is very different experiences as an adult, though.
It kind of blows my mind. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier with Watership Down. It sort of blows my mind how this movie was played for little kids. And I won't say that it's definitely not like a movie geared for adults, but it did have some scenes. Like, I was actually telling one of my coworkers the other day that I watched it for this podcast, and I could tell she was like, oh my God, you mean that movie where the rat tries to kill the little mouse with the spear? And that was like the only part that she remembered about the whole movie. There are some moments in that movie that are a little challenging maybe for a kid. I remember, for me, one of the biggest images of this movie is the scene where they inject the mouse with something and you see its little like red heartbeat, like boom, 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 boom. That was very dramatic imagery that has stuck with me forever. Like, if I remember nothing about that movie, that's one of those things that people hold on to and they're like, oh God, Secret of NIMH? You let your kid watch that?
I will say I remembered it both, I guess, metaphorically and literally being a much darker film than it was. Like, I was actually sort of surprised at how many scenes were not, darkly lit on top of. And I remember it being spookier and generally a little more dark.
Another thing that I never caught on to as a kid was the reason why they want to move. I was just sort of like, oh, the rodents are in peril for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. It didn't really dawn on me, even though I watched the whole movie, start to finish several times. The whole part about we live in a person's farm, they're onto us about dealing their electricity. Like, that part never really clicked for me until I was grown.
It reminds me a little bit of, you may not be on this side of TikTok, but there's the Leave the Leaves movement on TikTok, because I guess, like, critters, like, live in the leaves and stuff, particularly, like, moths. Because it's like, yeah, we live in conjunction with wild animals all the time, and yet it's interesting because it makes me wonder, like, I'm guessing the writer of the book is kind of more of an ecologist type of person. And it makes me wonder about like Don Bluth and his company, because they all wanted to do this film pretty bad. It seems like they had all left Disney. So not all, but like a lot of them had left Disney to work on this project.
Yeah, I think they were going to give it to Disney, weren't they? But they had just done The Rescuers. They were like, no, I'm going to pass on this other mouse joint.
Well, and I think it is a darker subject matter than even The Rescuers. The Rescuers, though, is kind of a sad movie.
The book 2, Miss Frisbee and the Rats of NIMH, it does kind of hammer down more on the whole we're stealing the farmers shit sentiment. The movie is just sort of like, yeah, we're going to tell you this and then we're going to move right along.
There's a certain time limit to movie that doesn't exist in books. You can tell a story in a certain concise amount of time in a movie.
I think that's one of my complaints, is that I don't think that it was paced as well as I would have liked. I don't know if they didn't do prestige TV type of thing and like limited series like that back then. So it was never going to get the treatment I think it probably deserved, but they were trying to cram a lot of stuff into this movie.
I was actually okay with the pacing. Like, I read the book maybe when I was in like 6th grade or something, 5th or 6th grade. And I remember feeling, this might be totally an ADHD thing. I just remember going, oh my God, I get it. They're stealing the farmers' electricity. I also remember the scenes with the bird. And I do want to talk about the bird. Were very frustrating, and I kind of loved that breakneck pace of the movie. They were just like plot point, plot point, plot point. It was actually extremely easy for me to watch, and I watched it with a 3-year-old who I was pretty convinced she was not going to be having it. I thought she would leave the room. I thought she would start talking over it, but she and I were both pretty engaged like the whole time. So that could just be ADHD brain.
Talking about Jeremy, right?
Yes.
Played by the impeccable Dom DeLuise.
Yes, I'm ready to gush, so I'll wait my turn.
Well, I was just going to say, and we can move on right after this. It's not that I think it was like breakneck. I think it actually was paced kind of oddly because, like, I have a hard time now watching older movies because they tend to be a little bit slow. And I think that the beginning of this movie is kind of on the slower pace, like those kind of older movies. And then it gets to a point where it's like, oh, they got to wrap it up. So then it goes like quick. Like, and that's why I was saying like a limited series would have probably been.
Is it because they fuck around with the bird a lot? Because the bird takes up a lot of time in the book and the movie. The movie, I understand why. But yeah, I just remember being frustrated with the bird in both versions.
Personally, I would say no. I think, and this is not to say there's no value in this, because I think there is. They had like very lingering shots at the beginning. You know, some of it was focusing on the beautiful like painted backgrounds. And so like, I don't mind that. I think that there is plenty of value to that kind of thing. It's just, if you don't have the time in your movie, you're going to have to do that kind of rushing to finish up at the end. And I think in some ways it was a little bit hurt by that, the quality. What do you think, Drew?
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering if it was mostly because they want to shorten the length of the movie, or if they had a deadline to get it done.
Yeah, I had not read anything about that. I did read a little bit about them working on it. I know that they were not given the budget that they really wanted, which is, it's honestly surprising. I think they did a great job with what they were given, you know?
Yeah, it is aesthetically pleasing, especially for a movie that is 41 years old.
Yeah.
Good. The voice acting was great.
Speaking of the visuals, like, the one thing I think I admired most about it is because it kind of reminds me of sort of the history of fine art a little bit too, where now, because we're doing like 3D animation so much, there's a focus on realism exclusively. And I think a lot of times that is to the detriment of the kind of expressiveness of it. And I guess that's why I like Impressionism so much, where a lot of the artistry in it is not meaning to be like a one-to-one to reality, right? Like, it is part of the artistry is seeing these brushstrokes, is seeing that this is painted. I wish there was a bit of more of a return to that in animation.
Yeah, no, that movie's animation was on point. Like, I miss hand-drawn animation so very much. And it's weird because thinking back on it as a kid, when we are watching it through those 700-pound TVs with
Yeah.
what my stepdad used to call color guns. If we would sit too close to the TV, he would be like, "Oh, are you counting the color guns?" It was like its own filter. It was like its soft glow filter. So I will say, to complement this film, even on a high definition TV, this looked great. Like, even with all the grittiness and...
Yeah, that being said, it could still use a remastering.
Master.
For sure. Yeah. I think when watching it, you kind of forget about it, you know? But that first scene is real crunchy.
Yep.
His withered old knuckles writing in his magic glowing ink. Old man had beautiful nails.
He really kept them, right?
They were all the same length. They were all looking very clean. They were just withered old knuckles.
Speaking on that, why was the only way okay, it's not the only way, and I guess there's a reason for this, but the way they denoted someone or a character being older was that they had like warty hands. Like the owl and Nicodemus, which with Nicodemus, because they can't put wrinkles, I guess, because they're furry.
They also used facial hair, like the owl kind of had mustache.
Yeah.
It did.
And Mr. Ages also. Yeah.
Mr. Ages is so cute.
Yeah, but he's kind of a dick. Sorry.
He's a crunchy old dude.
Yeah. I'll be honest, there was a point in this movie where I started to get really mad at some of the characters. We can get into that, but did you want to talk about Jeremy, the
bird?
Crow?
Yes.
Wait, was he a crow or a raven? He's a crow, right?
I think he's a crow.
Yeah, I think
I
so.
don't think it's specified. I'm sure they said it in the book, but I don't remember. He seems like a crow, yeah.
I think crows have the kind of orangey beaks, which would imply that he was a crow.
So
that's what I put in my notes. Crow. I'm
calling him the bird because there's a lot of J names in this,
which is also annoying.
And they are all like dude bro J names.
Jeremy, Justin, and Jenner.
Justin, Jenner, yeah,
and Jonathan.
Yeah, Jonathan.
Yeah. It made it hard when people were talking about someone who was like not in the scene to figure out who they were talking about.
But Jeremy, if I could for a moment, from a voice acting perspective, Don DeLuise, was he not some kind of like chef back in the day? Did I hallucinate that?
I don't know. All I know about Don DeLuise is that his son played the dad on Wizards of Waverly Place.
Yeah.
And that is literally the only thing I know about him.
Okay. He did Eat This, It'll Make You Feel Better. That was the name of his cookbook. And that might be where my wires are getting crossed, because as a child, I do remember this man on my television, the sound of his voice. He is an active memory for me. Okay. How many people today are like, yeah, I did a cookbook and I'm a chef, and also I am a return voice actor in these Don Bluth films, because I believe he also played the little basset hound in All Dogs Go to Heaven. Oh, hang on.
I'm not sure what he played, but he was definitely in All Dogs Go to Heaven. I do remember that.
As I was watching this, I was wondering, did he, not actively, but just from him being him in that movie, did he get Robin Williams cast as Genie?
Because they have sort of similar...
Right.
Could you imagine?
I bet, though, that Robin Williams, some of his kind of act and the way he acted, especially in a role like Genie, was probably somewhat referential, right?
Hang on. I'm glad you brought this up, Drew, because as I was watching both the on-screen animation, which was just, ironically, chef's kiss, but also the voice acting, I was reminded a little bit of Batty. Is that his name? From Ferngully?
Yep.
It was reminiscent of that. Well, maybe I should say Batty is reminiscent of Jeremy.
After. I will say at the very outset, and he drops it not too far in, but it did seem like he was trying to do a Cowardly Lion thing. If you watched it again at any point, at the very, very beginning and for the first couple scenes, it sounds like he is doing a version of the Cowardly Lion. And then it sort of drops off.
With the sneezing and the whole... Okay, this is where I want to gush. that whole, like, imagine you are a human being in a recording studio. That fake, well, for the actor, it's fake. That fake laughing and that, like, nervous tittering and that fake sneezing and shit like that, that is actually extremely challenging for voice actors. Like, that's not something that a lot of people do very well. And that was, like, reading the book as a kid, seeing the movie as a kid, I was like, oh, fucking Bird. He's just so taxing psychologically. But as an adult, I was able to appreciate that performance in a completely different way because of that, like, that whole, like, that whole shit he did that you mentioned is very Cowardly Lion-esque. Yeah, you are correct to say that.
I'm allergic to cat. I'm allergic to cat.
Yeah. No, that I thought the way they did Jeremy was very fun. Particularly, it was interesting they put in little bits about crows. So he keeps gathering string because he's making a nest, right?
Yep.
To mate. And then he
really want
sees...
Mrs. Brisby's shiny.
Yeah. Yeah. A shiny. I want a shiny for myself. So I did think that was very cute.
Mm-hmm.
It did give me a bit of pause, I'll say. Here's my... not problem. It feels a little inconsistent in terms of its own lore, though. Namely, that it seems like Jeremy and Auntie Shrew and even Mrs. Brisby should not have the amount of intelligence
that's what I was
that
thinking.
they do, because it seems to be equal to the rats.
If the experiments were done on the rats and the one mouse, I understand the kids being that intelligent, but like you said, none of the other creatures, including Mrs. Brisby, should be that smart.
I think you qualified that, though, by
they do tiny bit
read all of the sudden, which also, that in and of itself, I have a problem with, because that's magic. That's not science. It's like you...
Well, there's a bunch of magic.
Just if you have brain power now doesn't mean you instantly know how to read if you haven't learned.
You don't know English, right?
Well, hold on. They do say one thing about... I will say, I realized it because I watched it a second time. I noticed it because it was something I had questions about the first time. She says, Nicodemus is like, oh, can you read, basically? And she's like, I can. I'm not very good at it. Oh, yeah. Children are better. Yeah. So she does specifically... state it. So I think what happened was Jonathan like taught her how to read, but she's not great at it
because they're younger.
Maybe
easier to them.
An easier time with it because they have somehow inherited this genetic change from the dad. Okay, I didn't even think about that. That's good.
That doesn't explain Jeremy and Mrs. Shrew.
Yeah, and Auntie Shrew.
Auntie Shrew. Read
because well, I don't know, but they can speak, and it seems like Dragon can't speak.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, I think if I could talk about the cat for just a second, and the cat's name, because this sort of ties into this. The cat's name is, I think, sort of like an insight to its narrative function.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, like, well, absolutely, for sure, but also in that this is the monster. This is not a part of the quote-unquote civilization. Like, this is basically the dragon that may or may not necessarily know how to talk, but in this instance does not. So I feel like that sort of, the reason the cat can't talk is an artistic choice. I don't know if that's a cop-out, but that's sort of how I thought about it.
So I also made note of their clothing. First of all, their various states of dress and undress was so weird, but like
the mouse with a bow tied around it has always been my favorite.
Yeah, like, but then her sister is wearing like a full ass dress,
and she's then tied around her. It's very cute.
Yeah,
Teresa and Sophia.
But like, and then like technically you could say like Jeremy's naked then, right? Like, and then therefore Dragon is also naked. But like, I guess that's what I was wondering. Is the clothing some sort of shame that you got from being quote unquote more intelligent, right? But then it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense because of Auntie Shrew specifically.
So the rabbits also, there's a scene where the tractor is starting up and there's like rabbits and shit thumping on the floor who are also stark ass naked, if we're being honest.
Yeah, they don't have clothes on.
Community. Yeah, they're part of like the community that's being threatened by the tractor. What do they keep calling it? It's not the tractor.
Plow.
The plow.
The plow. Yeah. Also, is that what plows look like on the inside?
I guess.
I was like, this seems kind of flimsy. Is this actually what a plow would look like?
They fucked it up.
Yeah. So easy, too.
I did like that scene, though, for some weird reason, because it was like, we have Auntie Shrew, who's this old hag, and then we have Mrs. Brisby, who is, even though, and I think we should talk about Mrs. Brisby on her own, obviously, but Mrs. Brisby, who is consistently kind of meek, but still consistently kind of like, I am driven by this thing and I'm not going to shut up about it and I'm not going to stop.
She seems meek and yet in reality is quite brave.
Right.
Yeah.
She is meek and she is driven. Like she's not stopping, cutting the fuel line.
No.
After. She's
true braveness isn't not being afraid, it's overcoming your fear.
Yeah, it's being afraid and still doing your shit.
However, she's actually not the one that grabs the fuel line. It is Auntie Shrew. She is shivering and does not do the brave thing there, actually. She sort of does. She starts to.
I was going to say, she initiated that. She was just like,
yeah.
Watch. And then she got overwhelmed, and Auntie Shrew was like, hold my beer, girl, I got you.
Yeah. And I think that, like, the idea is meant to be that she grows in her bravery and her heart. Like, that's the whole thing with the pendant, right? But, so therefore, even though she's scared, she keeps doing things. Although I'm kind of mad at her for doing that, and we can get into that in a little later. What I didn't like is she does not get a first name. And I know technically, like, Mr. Ages and Auntie Shrew don't, but she's the main character.
Correct.
So combined with that, just really quickly, I didn't know how I felt about everything. Every piece of information she's getting is because I know your husband.
For sure. And she's sometimes even introduced as Mrs. Jonathan Brisby. Like, and she's the main character. What the hell?
Right.
Your first name is Mrs.
Yeah, like they act like that's the case.
Oh, speaking of her name, this was just a cursory Google search. I should have done it a long time ago, but we were talking about why did they change it from Mrs. Brisby to Mrs. Brisby? And Drew, you were right. It was totally because of litigation over the toy, the frisbee.
I read that they had actually all done their lines as Mrs. Frisbee and didn't realize the legal ramifications until the end. And I read this before I watched it a second time. So then I was listening for it because they basically had the audio engineers go in and clip like the BR sound and put it, and they did so good though. Like if you listen to it again, I think that's why sometimes actually Jeremy actually calls her Mrs. B instead, because they may not have been able to get enough of the sounds from him, but they did like really good.
I'm glad you brought that up because I watched it and then I Googled that and I was like, I wonder if that was obvious or not.
It's really not. Yeah, they did a bang up job, honestly.
1982.
If there's a possible legal reason, it's probably that.
Yep. Do we want to talk about Mrs. Brisby?
We did start a little bit.
Yeah, I know. Are we ready to
let's talk about her.
Dive into the Mama Mouse?
That sounds good.
So I know that I sort of aired a slight grievance with, and you bringing up the whole fact that she's not introduced as first name. That honestly never occurred to me. Like, that never, ever occurred to me. What I was finding sort of difficult to chew on was the fact that she was walking through all of these doors, all of these crazy, crazy doors, because of who her husband was. And I was like, so it just sort of, the thing that I thought was, number one, my question is, let's say this was a regular ass mouse, or like a, I don't know, rabbit or some hamster gerbil. And they were having some sort of like life or death problem. I got to get my kid out of here. He's sick. I can't move him. Would the rats of NIMH have just been like, fuck you. I don't know who you are. Yep. Like, are they that fish?
they chased her out. There was a rat who chased her out, and then she met up with Mr. Ages.
Yes, Brutus.
So, like, yeah, so they would have probably, which is, I was wondering a little bit about
They
that.
are not a welfare agency, basically.
Well, I'm wondering if there was any implication at all. And maybe this is just, because it could be one of two things. One could be that, like, they haven't lost a certain part of their animal instinct to kind of group together and not help other animals, right? Or is it a comment on kind of intelligence, making too much intelligence, making people lose empathy? You know what I mean? Like, if you're too logical, like, you lose.
They also sort of like deep in the paint with this whole issue of we've got to get out of here and get to this other place. Like they had other issues.
Right.
Yeah.
But luckily, she's Mrs. Jonathan Brisby.
I guess, yes.
Yeah.
Right. Problem resolved.
But I do think that's like a kind of a problem a little. I mean, to be fair, like Ms. Brisby is slightly more passive than a lot of other main characters, but I do think like it would feel a little better if it wasn't just she got access to things and she was respected only because of her husband. And like I get where they're coming from because her husband is the one that
the hero.
Well, yeah, and had been genetically modified and she hadn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which also is the ethics of that are a little questionable. If you think about it.
If he's this intelligent, and then he had with animals not that intelligent, considered bestiality.
Kind of, yeah. I was kind of like, that's weird though, right? Like, it's weird if she's a normal mouse and has no extra intelligence whatsoever, and he has this sentience that she doesn't have. What the fuck?
It's like, hey, baby, come here. She's like, I stand this.
I'm just saying, it does bring up that ethical question.
Okay, I am going to assume in my mind that there is a baseline level of anthropomorphism going on in Don Bluth movies in general. And these NIMH rats were just sort of like, now we can do differential equations. Like that's the only thing that sort of sets them apart. Because,
They have basic intelligence, but the experiment just gave them hyper intelligence.
Right. I think we're expected to believe that Auntie Shrew and the crow and the rabbits and all of that, they all sort of have like a baseline human intelligence for the purposes of storytelling. And also it's a Don Bluth movie. Let's be straightforward.
Yeah. Yeah. How many people do you think got their furry awakening watching this movie? I mean, Mrs. Brisby makes eyes at Justin. So
who is the hottest?
I don't. It's Justin. Come on.
Yeah. Even as, a straight male, I can say Justin probably the best looking of all the animals.
Hey y'all,
he's like meant to be though.
Yeah,
Brisby.
Right.
I'm
the
like,
hero. Well,
bitch,
hero.
I'll move a cinder block for my kid too. Let's talk about it over some wine.
Okay. No. He's supposed to be that kind of stereotypical hero. So they do try and, just like they did with Robin Hood the Fox, right? Like they're trying to instill these things that are considered attractive because attractive equals goodness in media.
Damn, that's deep.
Also, I hope you guys don't mind if I veer off a little.
Yep.
Jonathan kind of fucking sucked. What a terrible husband.
Yeah, he was basically like, I know some crazy shit, and I'm just going to up and die and having not told you anything. Like, I'm going to leave you perfectly blind. Yes, I agree with you. 110% on that.
I was wondering, maybe because I see everything from the lens of like newer movies. Is he actually dead?
Oh, shit. Ooh, there was a Secret of NIMH 2 movie.
Yeah, but it's about the kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I am not going to watch it.
Oh, speaking of the kids, I want to go back to Jonathan being terrible in a minute. But Shannon Doherty voiced the oldest daughter.
For real?
Yep. And Will Wheaton voiced Martin.
I knew that. Yeah. I saw that in the credits.
And I just thought that was fascinating.
Oldest, right?
Yeah, she was the oldest. Teresa was her name, I believe.
Teresa's
the one with
oldest.
the big bow.
Yeah, then Martin was the second oldest.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know. How old is Timmy supposed to be? Or Timothy?
I think Timothy's the youngest. Second youngest.
Oh.
Youngest or second? Yeah, youngest.
I thought Cynthia was the youngest because she looked the smallest, but it's really hard to say, honestly. They were mice.
Yeah, speaking of as mice, they were probably born at around the same time. They're
Oh,
just
you just opened up a whole new...
minutes, hours apart.
Right?
Be born in litters.
Yeah.
That's why I was like, it's weird how different their ages are. Unless they are saying, like Drew said, it's minutes apart, right?
Yeah, because a minute in a man's life is like a couple years, sure.
I don't know about a couple years. I'm pretty sure they live a little bit longer than that. They're not like flies, but still. Yeah,
Justin.
Jonathan. How long was he going to lie to her? That's my question.
Right.
Forever?
And about something like extremely huge. This altered my genetic material pretty much. Like, I have access to realms of knowledge that baby girl can only dream about.
Not only altered me, it could have ramifications on the whole world, potentially.
Mm-hmm. On, as Basil said, sort of implied on the kids. I never caught on to that.
Yeah, it's like a kind of a throwaway line, honestly, but it's just like some of these things, wouldn't you know them about someone before you got married to them, too? Like, because that's the thing. Okay, he for sure omitted things at the very least. But was he like, oh yeah, I grew up in the field across the way? Like,
that bold-faced lies. And not only that, but hey, I liberated these rats and another mouse that were being unethically experimented on, and now we have powers beyond even our own comprehension a little bit, is a pretty good hook, if I'm being honest. Like, that's a second date getter right there.
For sure. Yeah, that's so strange. I don't understand why. I'm guessing that's in the book. I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing that is sort of the basis of the book. I don't think they changed that. But why would you put that in? I don't understand. I guess there's no way around it, right?
Storytelling.
Yeah, they cannot tell the audience about it. But at least if they had a couple of lines where Mrs. Brizzy was like, oh, Jonathan mentioned this offhand, right? And like she didn't quite understand what he was saying, you know what I mean? Like, or didn't understand the full extent.
Totally blind to it.
Yeah. And that's fucked up. And especially when he knew he was going into a dangerous situation. And then you don't even have to tell her the whole thing. You just have to say like, hey, I might not come back tonight. I'm doing something kind of dangerous or something. Warn her that she might become a single mother.
The fate worse than death.
No, but those kids are young, and like there are several of them.
Yeah.
Like,
will be 100.
Right?
I think she's got Auntie Shrew.
Ugh, sort of.
Basil, you had mentioned when somebody you know says the word precocious wrong, and as soon as you said that, I thought of Auntie Shrew going, oh, how precocious about the Will Wheaton mouse.
I think I would call it that, but okay. I would probably be like, oh, what a little asshole.
Right. How precocious. So did we dish sufficiently on, what the hell is his name?
Jonathan.
Jeremy? Jeremy's
Jonathan.
Jonathan is the tall.
And Justin is the guard
Captain
or
captain of the
whatever he
guard.
is. And I couldn't tell if they were kind of, because when she first meets him, Justin, and she's a widower, so, you know, there's nothing wrong with this, but she kind of like makes eyes at him.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking.
Hold on. Let's back up a little bit. The first thing that happens after this poor mouse MILF has been
Mouse-elf?
in the middle of like a have at ye with Brutus, the Lancer, and she's horrified. and no one's around her but this feeble old man who's hobbling around on crutches. What the hell is the mouse's name? Sexy
Justin?
man. Justin, thank you. Like, creeps up behind her with like the whole nutcracker hat. I was like, dude, she should have shanked you. Right there.
He thought he was being so funny.
You would have gotten a key in your appendix.
He totally reminded me of another movie when he's first introduced, The Great Mouse Detective.
Did he remind you of Basil?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're drawn very similarly. Is it the same animators? Because is Great Mouse Detective Disney?
It is Disney.
It is, yes.
But it still might be same animators, honestly.
They are cut from the same mold, for sure. More so even than the Rescuers, I think.
For sure. But like they're literally the same animators. They left.
Although Basil's a mouse, Justin's a rat, right?
He's a big, tall, sexy rat.
Yes. Yeah. They are not terribly distinguished. In fact, when they said basically the only one that could fit through would be a mouse, I was kind of like, Justin is so thin. What are you talking about?
Right. Yeah, no, rats can fit through space. You know what's crazy? I've had rats. As a child, I was that weird kid. I had rats as pets. I've had mice as pets. Rats are, if we're talking about mentally modified mouse with another mouse, weird. Plain old rat with a mouse, extremely weird. Because they are, as critters, they are completely different. A rat is sort of like closer on par with a cat than a mouse in terms of trainability and intelligence and memory retention and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Mouse is very much woodland creature.
Well, them saying, oh, only a mouse could fit through. In real life, sure, they are vastly different in size. But the way they were drawn, of course Justin could fit through there. Like, what?
Spaghetti noodle. Okay, so I have heard this about cats. I have heard that a cat's whisker length tells them how big of a space that they can fit through. So basically, if they're like nosing around at an opening or something, they use that information that they get from their whiskers to be like, okay, I can fit through this. I wonder if it's the same with rats.
I don't see why it wouldn't be. That's probably true, honestly.
Because, yeah, cats can fit through some tiny shit. Rats can, too.
Yeah, I thought they were going to go somewhere when Mrs. Brisby kind of made eyes at Justin, but then it was like nothing.
Yeah,
and I was like, was it supposed to be something, or what's up with that? And why were there no female rats?
There truly weren't. Yeah, no, I did not catch that either. There were no female... Yeah.
I wonder if that's based on reality, though. Like, with lab testing, I'm not overly familiar with that kind of testing.
Because the scientists don't want to risk any pregnancy.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that makes sense. The only thing I know is that apparently rats and mice are just like genetically so far away from us that the data they get from them, like 80% of it is not useful.
Right.
Yeah, for humans.
I think we're giving the film too much credit.
Probably.
Yeah, I think it was 1980 and we have got a handful of token females. As a matter of fact, we had Auntie Shrew, we had Mrs. Brisby, and then the kids.
Cynthia and
Teresa.
Oh, and Miss Wright, the bird. That's her name is in the credits, I think.
Oh, the bird at the end?
Yeah, the female bird.
They named the bird.
She doesn't count. Yeah, they always do that. Like, you know, in Kiki's Delivery Service where Gigi falls in love with a white cat, she has a name. I don't know what it is, but she has a name.
You gotta watch the credits to find out.
Speaking of being small enough to go in, why the fuck did they let her do that? She had 4 children at home to take care of, and she's the only person they have left. And these rats have comparatively nothing to lose. Not nothing. I'm not going to say your life is worthless without children, but I'm just saying she's the provider.
They seemed very, very invested in their bullshit to the point there was a split in these group of rats that was causing a lot of discord. So I think they might have been preoccupied. Hell, I don't know.
But they were like so hell-bent on what they wanted from her. And to be fair, there is a part where Nicodemus says, you will give more to us than we give to you. Which, is he psychic and can tell the future? I don't know. But then he says that thing. So I'm like, okay. But yeah, they were just so single-minded. They didn't consider that this person has so much to lose in that they are a provider and the only provider for her family, basically, for other beings. Whereas I get that the rats technically, quote unquote, cannot do it or whatever, but like find somebody else.
1.2, weren't they like, shit, the ropes have been cut to your cinder block. The end.
Oh, well, yeah. Like,
I just asked Jeremy to go get some rope.
Yeah. And like, to be fair, it seems like Justin had some sort of sense of, I don't know, chivalry or whatever regarding that comparatively. But that's what I was saying. I don't know if they're trying to say anything about how dismissive or unempathetic that the rats seem to be, you know? Maybe they weren't trying to say anything.
I almost want to say laissez-faire, but they weren't laissez-faire either, because they were sort of balls deep in their own upheaval a little bit.
Yeah.
They were very, very just like laser focused on this divide of, I want to stay here and mooch off the farmer, risks be damned, or we want to get the fuck out of here. I had kind of a problem with the movie of the whole, they sort of made a big deal about, oh, we're stealing and stealing is wrong. And I'm like, okay, you don't have to do all that. You do not have to do all that for us. Just say you're stealing and you could be killed for it. And move along. That would have made that whole thing more palatable to me than the whole moral. It almost seems like a moral thing that they were kind of shoehorn in there. Stealing is wrong. I don't give a fuck. You're going to get killed if you don't find something better. But then you have this one asshole that's sort of like
on a move.
Yeah, he was me. Honestly, I'm Jenner. I took his. I do not like change.
How much could they be stealing, really?
Right?
Yeah.
We cost over like $2.50.
Like they just had like some fucking string lights. My God.
Right.
But yeah, I did find that interesting because it's like sometimes it seemed like the electricity and magic had this weird crossover, and I couldn't always tell what was supposed to be which as well. And I think I'll say that makes that stealing electricity thing even flimsier because there seems to be magic too.
Right. Which is kind of crazy how just getting some intelligence gave the ability to use magic.
Was not very well, I think, explained the lore. And I think that's part of the issue with the time too, because it's like, and I guess I was reading something that there's no magic in the books. They're just smart and there's just electricity stuff. And there's no amulet that raised the children out of the mud. So it was specifically a invention of the movie, which I think part of it
kind of sounds like a case of the book being better than the movie.
I mean, possibly. I'm wondering if they wanted this arc for Mrs. Brisby about her having a courageous heart, because that is kind of her arc, right? Doing things that are more and more courageous, although sometimes stupid, you know, because she has a courageous heart. But I feel like there must have been a better way than to just add magic and then make the magic not really make sense.
It really didn't have a purpose, did it? It was not explained. No. Yeah, it was just like, here you go.
Something kind of mystical, kind of, I don't know. I'll say earlier I was sort of shitting on the quote unquote misogyny or whatever, or that they don't give Mrs. Brisby a name and stuff like that. And I do want to say, though, like, having a mother as your main character is really different, and it is nice to see. And she's not feminine. I find a lot of movies think that to make a strong female character, they literally need to be like a man or act like a man. I know these are kind of gendered ideas, but a lot of times they will take out anything that is considered quote unquote feminine because feminine things cannot be strong, right? And I think that's where like kind of motherhood kind of helps a little bit because that is a way in which we kind of can see a certain amount of strength. I mean, not always. But I do like that we have a character who is fiercely invested in her children.
Is also incredibly scared.
Yeah. And those are things that are okay, but they're also the things that sort of, like her children are kind of, in a way, the thing that makes her brave too.
Right. I completely agree. I'm glad you brought that up because I actually appreciated. I think in a lot of, just like you said, Basil, it's almost like in today's cinematic climate, a woman being meek, a woman being afraid. No, get her off screen. She's got to come out guns a-blazing, or else we're not going to make her our main. I loved that she was just like, I'm scared shitless throughout this whole movie. She was just like, I'm scared shitless to do this, but I'm fucking doing the thing because of my kids. I would have liked it even if it wasn't because of my kids. I really, really liked Mrs. Brisby's fear. I loved her trepidation. I loved that she went to the bird. She went to Mr. Ages, and they both, the bird was just sort of like, I have this cute character quirk and I'm going to talk over you a little bit. And she was like, no, I've got to get home to my kids. She went to Mr. Ages and he was like, get the hell out of here. I'm busy. I'm doing my own thing. And she was like, hi, my kids. Like, she was persistent, even though she was soft spoken. Yeah, I love that scene where she is in the cage. Yeah. That's a crazy sentence to say, but I love that scene where she's in the cage and she basically drop kicks the water bucket out. She cuts herself on the arm. She's doing all this crazy crap to try and get out of that cage so that she can drug that cat. Or I think she had already drugged the cat at that point.
She wanted to leave to make sure they knew that NIMH was coming to cut down the rose bush the next day. Yeah.
She was just like a normal lady.
Yeah.
But she was driven.
And I think that I'm glad that they didn't play it like her kindness was a flaw, right? Because I think that a lot of movies sort of do that. Her kind of kindness, her emotional intelligence, and it showed that she was also able to partially make connections. Unfortunately, some of that had to do with her husband, but
she wasn't taken advantage of because of her kindness or weakness, so on and so forth.
Yeah, they were actually in some ways kind of a strength.
Yeah. Love the mommy nuts.
I will say it's weird that there was one character named Nicodemus and then the rest of them had like regular Joe ass names. Like, I did find that really odd.
Hi, I'm John.
Like, what the hell?
And they couldn't give Mrs. Brisby a name. Hi, I'm Lisa.
I know. I guess people sometimes call her Elizabeth because that's the name of the voice actress who played her. And she has, since passed. But that's like a fan thing. It's not real. So, yeah, not real. It's real, but it doesn't exactly count in terms of giving it to the storytellers and the people who made the movie.
No, it's not canon. The end. Okay, so we talked about the bird. We talked about the hot rat. We talked about Mrs. Brisby. I think we talked a little bit about Auntie Shrew. I talked a little bit about the cat.
Talk about the great owl.
The great owl. I'm not going to lie. That was another thing that kind of scared the crap out of me.
Played by John Carradine.
Yeah, who is he?
Father of David Carradine.
I was going to ask if that was the case.
Yep.
It's funny, we got two dads whose kids went on to do acting as well, which, shows that Nepo babies are not new. The owl is scary. He stares openly and it's interesting because they don't put a lot of expression in his face. And you could say it's because he's a bird, right? But Jeremy's a bird and has lots of expression. Mm-hmm. So it was clearly very purposeful to have him kind of have this kind of stoic look.
He's a bird of prey.
I do love Jeremy is like, the great owl, are you sure? I don't want to fuck with that guy.
Yeah, everybody's like, the great owl, you want to see the great owl? What the hell?
Even the other bird is just like, I want to mess with that dude. Covered in long flowing cobwebs, which is my favorite. Yeah. I'm like, well, man, you leave every night to go hunt. Why you got these cobwebs on you? But it was aesthetically effective.
Oh, for sure. In terms of the creepy atmosphere. And I think that's why when I was going into this, I thought of it as darker because I think those were the more impactful things to me. As a child was these scary parts.
The scary owl with the booming voice and then the needle into the mouse with the boom, 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 red heartbeat.
Yeah. I don't know. That's all I really have to say about the owl, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
He really
It's
did.
such a short scene.
Very short scene, and I just wanted to make sure you mentioned that character.
Yeah.
It really did seem like, okay, so here's a question. Mrs. Brisby had two things going on for her as far as the rats were concerned. Number one, first and foremost, she was
Mrs. Jonathan Brisby.
Jonathan's wife. Number two,
Yep.
you went to the owl? You went to the owl? The owl?
Yeah.
If she would have been, again, I'm going to pose this question. If she had not been married to Jonathan, but yet also dealt with the owl, or are we in the pipeline like, because you're Jonathan's wife, you have the courage and the power to go to the owl? I don't know. That was just sort of a passing thought.
No, it's interesting. They believe her, right? But why should they?
As she saw the owl.
Or because she's Jonathan's wife, so she must be good and wonderful because Jonathan was good and wonderful.
He's double good.
It kind of reminds me, not that this happened, but it's funny because so much of her journey has to do with her husband, right? And her connections to her husband and whatever. But he also exists in the way that a lot of times when the genders are reversed in films, when there's like a heterosexual couple
Dead girlfriend.
the dead girlfriend or wife, and like of course they don't have a scene of him being like, oh, I love you so much or anything like that, but it reminds me.
Yes, John Wick phenomena, yes.
Well, yeah.
I know it was going on way before John Wick, but
I don't know if this falls under the being fridged thing or not, but a subversion.
there was a Wolverine movie that really hit like that. Wolverine was only motivated, I won't say only motivated, but they sort of almost, what's the word I want to use? There is a trope where it's sort of like dead girlfriend slash wife slash daughter motivation porn.
Yeah, so that's what I was sort of referencing. It's called Women in Refrigerators, and that like female characters in a lot of media exist for only the furthering of the male lead's journey or whatever task. It is based only on the suffering of a woman, essentially. And it's kind of interesting to see that a little bit reversed. I mean, I don't think it's wholly reversed, unfortunately, because I think in normal fridging media that the women have lost all kind of agency. And I think that's not really true in this case for Jonathan, right?
Really weird too if in these movies they would be like, oh, hi, John Wick, I only am going to help you because I know your dead wife.
Yeah, that would be less likely to happen. Yeah, like they don't have a presence outside of
dying. Yeah,
outside of dying and having been spouses or partners with this main character. So like
the whole scene where they rescued other people from being injected with the smart drug.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to bring up was I was telling Drew earlier tonight, right before we started recording, I looked up sort of like the blockbuster hits of the same year that Secret of NIMH was released. And this is a buck wild time. I will say, if you fast forward to 1984, it gets a little bit more mainstream. It gets a little bit, some would say better, but it gets a little bit more palatable to the masses. But 1982, we had Secret of NIMH. We had The Dark Crystal. We had The Last Unicorn.
Oh, damn, that's a good one.
What else? Poltergeist. The original Poltergeist. The Thing.
Yeah.
Beastmaster. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Like, this was a very, like, sort of weird time of filmmaking, and very perfectly with that sort of creepy fantasy. Maybe it's for kids, question mark, fear of the year.
Well, it sounds like that year was just generally more experimental, you know what I mean, comparatively.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah, like that studios, I guess, were taking more risks, because I do think all of those movies are like a little bit risky in a way. Maybe not all of them, but yeah.
No. The Dark Crystal, huge risk. Huge. And I'm saying that as a fan.
I want to say Poltergeist kind of is too, but not really, because I think Exorcist came out a few years before that.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
if
you fast forward to 1984, then you've got Karate Kid. You know, it's sort of like all of a sudden takes a shift to what we would call the 80s. In 82, we were still very much coming off of the high of the 70s.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can we talk about how Brian Jacques was definitely inspired by this film /
The
book?
works of this man.
I actually haven't. I'm familiar with them because they were very popular with some of the people in my grade. Mostly boys, let's be honest. But
He was just in the zeitgeist at the time, but I
yeah,
think he definitely saw this movie or read the book.
yeah,
and
yeah,
got
for
inspired.
sure. Well, it's kind of like Mouse Guard is a kind of newer one that clearly takes inspiration from Redwall as well. Like, you know what I mean? It's kind of cyclical. It kind of goes on in a way. That's the joy of our thoughts, or just our last sort of, and our kind of final verdict about how we feel about the
Is
film.
it Yestalgia or nostalgia?
All right, who wants to start?
I'm prepared. This movie, I'm prepared to judge. This was definitely Yestalgia for me. I was equally surprised that my 3-year-old sat through the entire thing, glued to the TV. I absolutely did not. Then again, this is my kid. She's a little strange. I loved absolutely. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do my main points of where I gushed at this movie. Number 1, Dom DeLuise. I'm sorry. His performance. I'm sorry, Dom, wherever you may be, however you may exist. I slept on your performance. Absolutely beautiful performance as that bird. I hated that bird in the book. I hated that bird in the movie as a child. Absolutely in love with his vocal performance as Jeremy. Did I get the right J?
Yeah.
Thank you. My second point of just, wow, I loved this. I was so entertained. And Basil, I know this was a neg for you. I loved the bam, bam, bam pacing of it. I cannot sit through a 3-hour Marvel movie. Cannot do it for medical reasons. I honestly think that's why my toddler was able to sit through it, was because we are constantly being shown something new. We are constantly moving on to the next plot point. I appreciated that. Thank you, Don Bluth. Third thing, Mrs. Brisby herself. I really, really enjoyed that we had a character that was consistently afraid. She was afraid in the beginning of the movie. She was afraid at the end of the movie when she grabbed the magical Deus Ex Machina pendant and it burned her hand. She was constantly like, fuck it, we ball. I've lived in that mode for like the past 3 years. So I personally found her to be absolutely precious and absolutely powerful. Yeah, did they only kind of let her in because of her name? Sure, whatever. I felt like that was completely overshadowed by her characterization. She was given good thought. She was given depth. The people who directed this movie, the people who directed the animation, the people who wrote the dialogue, they clearly, I feel like, loved her. That's that. I give it a yes.
Cool. For me, it's still a Yestalgia, as much as I bitched about it, which obviously I did. But I bitch about things I like all the time. And I think, yeah, like it for sure has its flaws. A lot of them are kind of based, I think, in the time period in which it came out. But overall is like really enjoyable. And even if nothing else, those backgrounds, man, those hand-painted backgrounds are just gorgeous. So if nothing else, you're going to get to see some really beautiful animation and background work. So yes, for me, Drew.
It's also a yes for me. It's a good movie. I enjoyed it a lot.
Well, we should do more Don Bluth then.
Oh, yes.
I enjoyed the character of Jeremy. I like Mrs. Brisby's character. Villain was kind of for me because he was like just kind of stock.
They threw him in at the end.
Yeah, overall story was good. I like the mixture of comedy with seriousness. So yeah, definitely a yes. Nostalgia for me too.
So that is our conclusions. What media have we been enjoying that's new? For me, I've read the first 2. There are 3 in this series, and it is called Regency Fairy Tale series. If you like Bridgerton and fairies, you'll probably like these books. That's essentially what they've done, is mesh those 2 together, and that's my jam. So yeah, I've been really enjoying them, and hopefully the third one's as good as the first 2.
What's it called again?
It's the Regency Fairy Tales series. There's 3 of them. She's gonna, I believe, start on Victorian fairy tales soon as well. So
nice.
Oh, and the author there is Olivia Atwater. Who's next?
Okay, I'm a weeb, so I have been keeping up with One Piece. I am fully current stuff, but I'm not expecting anyone to start that. I already know the whole too long and everything. Besides that,
Yeah.
I've been watching the most recent season of Chucky.
It's a series?
Oh, it is. You're right.
Cool. Do you want to say anything else on that, or?
Chucky's up to his killing ways, and he's in the White House. Maybe that might be a slight spoiler, but not really.
Oh my god. All right. Amanda, do you want to give yours?
I'm sorry, this is totally unsatisfying, but I don't get to consume media for my own age group. It's strictly, I am in toddler land. And this too, we could probably also do an episode on, but I have been watching with my kid lately a ton of Sesame Street, and I have been genuinely enjoying it. I just started watching Sesame Street with her. Like, I didn't put it on for her as a baby, really. And it's interesting to me to see sort of the differences that have popped up since the early 80s. Number one, Big Bird used to have a big, huge tuft of white feathers on his head. Not a big, huge, but he did used to have like a big old patch of white on his forehead. And now it's sort of just like a little salt and pepper. Yeah, I've had good memories and I've had a good time watching that with my kid. It's something that's totally safe that I never think to myself like, oh, I'm going to have to explain to her why this is hateful or not cool or yeah, I just
outdated.
know. Exactly, yes. And we are going to just have a legit good time. Yeah, if you ask me about adult media, I got to take some PTO.
Just next time we do a recording, think on it. This has been the Yestalgia podcast.
Bye-bye.